Ruth, chapter 2. Although Ruth is an ancient, Old Testament story, set in a very different culture from our own, it has themes which can still resonate with us today. In chapter 1, we've met Naomi and her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, and the scene has been set, with Ruth leaving her native Moab to accompany Naomi to her hometown of Bethlehem. Naomi had left Bethlehem, a town which means house of bread, at a time of famine, when there was no bread. Now the famine is over and it's harvest time. But Naomi and Ruth, as poor, unsupported widows, are unable to earn a living and still have no bread. In the absence of benefits, pensions, universal credit, free school meals, and even food banks, one way open to them to feed themselves is gleaning, a sort of free pick your own, following the harvesters and gathering the grain that they've left behind. It would have been back-breaking work, but better than starvation. Now we meet Boaz, a new character in the story. What do we know about Boaz? He's a prominent, rich man and a relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. He's a respected citizen. He owns fields and employs servants to do the harvesting. Even the servants seem to respect him. If we like labelling people as goodies or baddies, as we so often seem to do, we can put him down as a goodie. Perhaps he's even the sort of person who deserves a statue to be put up in his honour. I can't say I have strong feelings about statues, but I do know that you can find fault with even the most revered person if you know enough about them. It's all very well to put someone on a pedestal, but we all have feet of clay. I definitely prefer to focus on the good in people. But there are times when some faults need to be pointed out so that they can be put right, or at least we can learn from them. Boaz is a good man, but as a relative of Naomi, I wonder why it took him so long to do anything for her. He says that he's heard all about her. So why wasn't he on the doorstep with a welcoming food parcel? And although he protects Ruth from being molested, there's no indication that he did anything to change the society in which it could be taken for granted that vulnerable women could be taken advantage of by men. Some things still need to change. I don't want to criticise Boaz, simply to point out that, like the rest of us, he's not perfect. There's a reason why our services usually include a prayer of confession. We all fall short, in thought, word, and deed, or at the very least in what we have failed to do. Even Mother Teresa one of the most inspirational people of the 20th century, has been criticised for what she failed to do, as well as admired for all that she did. What stands out about Boaz is his kindness. He's kind to Ruth, even when the first thing he knows about her is that she's a foreigner. When he asks, "Who's that over there?" the answer he gets is, "Oh, she's an immigrant. It's that woman from Moab." Fortunately, he looks beyond her nationality and status to see what sort of person she is. He's heard of her kindness to Naomi and her hard work in the fields, and is impressed. There was an interesting programme on Channel 4 recently called "The School That Tried to End Racism." It showed a multiracial class of children who all claimed to believe that everyone was equal and race didn't matter. They began by taking a test which showed an unconscious bias towards white people. They were then separated into groups by skin colour, white or non-white. When asked about how they felt about being white, the members of that group had nothing to say. It wasn't something they'd ever had to think about. The other group had plenty to say about their experiences of being treated differently because of their race. Both groups wanted to be careful not to offend the others. But by facing up to some realities about racism and having conversations in which they could speak openly about race and their own experiences and feelings, they could understand each other better. And when they later took the original test again, the unconscious racial bias had gone. In these days of Black Lives Matter, we might well have different opinions about appropriate ways of claiming that Black Lives Matter, but we can all become more aware of our unconscious bias and ask ourselves whether we judge people on their race, nationality, skin colour, rather than getting to know them. Black Lives Matter. Immigrants and asylum seekers matter. Migrant workers matter. People struggling to feed their families matter. We all matter to God, and we should all matter to each other. Back to the story of Ruth. This story is probably in the Bible as a reminder to those who wanted to keep their race pure that God included foreigners in his story. Boaz makes sure that Ruth is taken care of. He shares his lunch with her. He says, "Come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel into the sour wine." That makes me think of communion. We've been missing communion services, as we've been missing meeting in person for worship. But of course, any meal can be communion. When we give thanks to God for his provision and ask for his blessing. There's an echo too here of the feeding of the 5,000. Ruth ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Plentifully provided for. Boaz generously asks his workers to leave plenty of barley for Ruth to glean, even to pull out some from the bundles they've already harvested. So she has plenty to take home, to share with her mother-in-law. Bethlehem now lives up to its name, the house of bread. There is plenty for all when it is shared. If we have plenty at this time, when many are struggling, we can afford to be generous too, supporting food banks, the Rainbow Centre, all we can, or any of the many other charities supporting people in need. There are 4 things that I want to take away from my contemplation of this chapter. Number 1, beware of putting people on pedestals. Look for the best in everyone, but be aware that even the most respected people have their faults. Number 2, beware of racism, including unconscious racial bias. Think very hard before you say, I'm not racist, but... Number 3, be grateful. Count your blessings. Give thanks for God's generous provision. And finally, be generous. Share your plenty. Act and pray for a world where everyone can eat and be satisfied. Amen.